Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast, where friends who follow Jesus help each other make sense of the world. I'm your host, Curtis Chang. This podcast is produced by a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. The most important cinematic event of the year is about to happen: the release of Christopher Nolan's movie adaptation of The Odyssey. The Odyssey is, of course, one of the most influential works of literature in the Western world. Will this movie do justice to that book? What might we get out of reading the book that only can be delivered via reading? What are key themes that we should look out for when watching the movie? These and other questions prompted me to reach out to Jessica Hooten Wilson. Jessica is the Fletcher Jones Chair of Great Books at Pepperdine University, and she is my go-to person to help me appreciate great literature. Every conversation with Jessica brings me new insights, inspiration to read, and just plain fun. And I think you'll benefit in the same way. Here's my conversation with Jessica. Jessica, welcome back to the Good Faith Podcast. It's been too long.
Thank you. I'm excited. We're going to talk about books again.
We are. And before we begin the actual conversation about the book itself, I need to begin with a personal confession of mine to the audience. So when Professor Wilson here put the Odyssey on the syllabus, and she put on the syllabus the entire book of the Odyssey, all 600 pages, I realized this is going to take me like 10 hours to read it. So I had to go to her office hours, hat in hand, and confess sheepishly, I hadn't actually read the book before. I mean, I'd written essays, using the Scylla and Charybdis metaphor. I know when we say something like the siren's call, I know what that's referring to. I just never read the actual book before. So, embarrassed, I confess that. And also that I did not have time to read a 600-page book. So Professor Wilson, with just like a slight note of disappointment in her star pupil, was kind enough to give me an alternative assignment. She gave me the abridged version of the Odyssey, Hackett Publishing's version with Stanley Lombardo's translation. It only took me about half the time I otherwise would have required. So thank you for doing that.
It's a good translation, I think. Stanley does a great job, and then getting to only read half, it cuts down the workload, but it's a good teaser, a good starter.
I was glad I did, but I want to have all of that segue into a question that may be in some of our listeners' minds, which is, I also haven't read the Odyssey, and I may not even have 5 hours to read the abridged version. Why should I even try when I can get Christopher Nolan's version in under 3 hours and get Matt Damon to boot, right? So what do you get out of reading the book that you can't just get essentially from watching the movie?
Part of it is I don't know yet because I haven't seen the movie. I'm really excited to see what they do with it. And there is some value in getting the story, right? The Odyssey is a phenomenal story with rich characters, complex emotions. It really has a lot of those kind of permanent human things that you'll probably get in the film. And so I'm not one against adaptation. I was telling someone recently, I actually tell the story to my kids and they're not reading it, right? From the time they're 3 or 4, we tell the story of Odysseus before we go to bed and we talk about those things. So the story in and of itself is worth something. But getting to actually read the poem, there's a lot of wrestling that is required. So it's kind of like the story of the Bible, and there's so much to be said for what the story of the Bible tells us. And then when you dig into the language and you read verse by verse and you find yourself wrestling and learning something that you didn't just have when you knew the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors, right? You get into it and you get to go deeper. And I think most of our lives are like that. Learning requires that first introduction. It's the milk, right? The way Paul talks about it. And then you got to go deeper. You got to be ready for meat. And when you read the Odyssey, the poem, you're getting the meat.
Okay, I had that exact same experience, and I want to unpack that a little more as we talk. But given that there is something helpful about just getting the story, the plot, and that movies are actually quite good for doing that in a attractive and succinct fashion. In general, do you have some advice on with a given story, is it better to watch the movie first, then read the book, then watch the movie? What's your advice on that?
Oh man, it's so different for every single piece. Like, so I think of things like Nicholas Sparks novels. I mean, just watch the movie. Like, I don't even know that you even need to read the book or take the time.
Right.
The movie's shorter and like you're getting the gist of it. It's not something where the literature asks something of you.
Yeah.
With things like Lord of the Rings, I purposefully made sure when I was in high school when those movies came out, and I made sure that I read the book before I saw the film. You know, I wanted to know because I knew it was a rich story and there's no way you could dramatize all of it. And I wanted to see, what did they choose? What did they leave out? So I think some stories are like that. You know that it's literary. You can trust your friends. You can trust your teachers and say, there's going to be something that I should first do. I should read it so that I can go in with that kind of discernment when I watch it.
Well, I think one of the reasons why you might want to consider reading the book first is exactly what you described. And interestingly, in your description of your approach to Lord of the Rings, I think I've shared this before, but my wife reads the Lord of the Rings probably every few years. She talks about it as, you know, her pilgrimage back to Middle Earth. And she, when the, you know, movies came out, the Peter Jackson movies came out, she deliberately chose, even though there was great temptation on the part of those of us who wanted to watch the movie, deliberately chose not to watch that movie precisely because after years of reading the book, she had a picture of all of the characters, right? And so she didn't want that to be replaced, to be supplanted by, because those childhood images were so valuable to her, she didn't want those to be replaced by Hollywood. And I was thinking about that at this exact same point when I was reading the Odyssey, and just this sort of way in which books, precisely by not supplying you the images, forces you to actually exercise your own imaginative muscles. And so, you know, it's like, because the text does not present the images, you have to dig within yourself to supply those images from your, perhaps even your own experience, right? So the example for me was in book 5 of the Odyssey, Odysseus shipwrecked by Poseidon, the god Poseidon, and Homer, in Lombardo's translation, says this: he, Odysseus, was under a long time unable to surface from the heaving swell of the monstrous wave. I love that phrase. Heaving swell of the monstrous wave, weighted down by the clothes Calypso had given him. At last he came up, spitting out salt water, sea brine gurgling from his nostrils and mouth. Okay, so when I was reading that, precisely because I was encountering that story not through Christopher Nolan's sort of sweeping sound special effects or the sound effects coming through my surround sound system at my home theater, or didn't have the handsome face of Matt Damon to look at. Right? Like my mind like started filling in the blanks by this time when I was in Hawaii, and I was, you know, kind of out in the Pacific Ocean in the depths for the first time. And I started realizing I was getting carried further and further away from the shore. And those Pacific waves are like that heaving swell of the monstrous wave. And I started like getting sucked underneath, and that sea brine gurgling from my nostrils and mouth. Like, that was terrifying. That was like a terrifying memory. I remember what the sea looked like around me and kind of going under, coming up, going under. And then suddenly that little scene from book 5 of the Odyssey came alive for me. And I also was able to place myself in the story in a way that made that story vivid and real and meaningful, right? So that's, at least for me, is sort of the reason why it's helpful. It pays off to put in the work and allow those muscles, which so are infrequently exercised because the images are so supplied to us, to have those muscles of actually conjuring up our own images from our own past. So anyways, that's a long wind up to ask you, what would be your example of that happening for you in the Odyssey? Was there some text where you're like, oh, that made an imaginative connection for you?
Yeah. So I was thinking, as you were talking about what your wife was saying, how she kind of grew up with these images of Lord of the Rings, that would be another reason why you wouldn't want to watch the movies yet, or maybe at all, because I've read the Odyssey when I was 14 the first time. And then I read it in college. And then I read it later. And now I read it I'm in my 40s. And Odysseus changes with me.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right? But if I had a film version of it, he would always be Matt Damon. Right?
Yeah.
He'd be static.
Yeah.
Whereas the way that I've pictured him has grown up with me, has taken different hold of my imagination. Like the characters changed throughout my life.
That's fascinating. So how has Odysseus changed for you over the years?
Well, he was an old man, right? So, when I was reading this the first time, he was ancient, and I was 14. I connected so much more with Telemachus when I read this as a kid, thinking about
Telemachus, those are the son, just for all people.
Yeah, Telemachus being a son and, not having his father. And I was so connected to that kind of teenage story. And then I was also into the monsters and the adventures. Right. But now in my 40s, psychologically, I think of Odysseus, I almost have an image of my husband. I think of the marriage. I think of what it's like when we're apart. And, I have never spent 20 years away from him. Yeah. But just those feelings of displacement, right? Because the two have become one, and to not have that other half of you and that feeling, that none of that occurred to me when I was 14. So I think that the narratives too, if it's not just about the story and the plot line, the way that it pulled you in and you had a reminder of a moment for you that connected to the language, that's me when I read Odysseus now. There's different things that I hold on to when I feel like I'm giving away the ending, but when he...
It's okay. It's been around a while. I think there are spoilers plenty. So...
At the very end, Penelope tries to get him to prove that he's her husband. Yeah. And that now is one of those metaphors I really hold on to, where it talks about the return of Odysseus when she realizes it's her husband. She is the one that now feels like she's returned to shore, as though she's had an Odyssey.
Right. Oh, interesting.
And that metaphor that they use in the description, in which it says she was like a man longing for the shore after being shipwrecked. And it's this wasn't just him physically on the sea. She was on the sea, she had her own journey in that way. And so those are the kinds of things that the narrative has recalled new ways of experience for me as I read it.
That's so fascinating. I want you to say a little bit more about Penelope, because the popular imagination that at least I had of the book is it's a man's book. It's a manly book of manly Greek heroes. And reading it, one of the things you discover when reading it, it's wow, there's a lot about Penelope here. There's a lot about their relationship. There's a lot about family dynamics. And so say more for female potential readers. What might they get out of the book via Penelope?
Oh, man. Okay. So this is what's so funny about teaching this epic, because in the 19th century, there was actually a man named Samuel Butler. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I have.
And he wrote the authoress of the Odyssey.
Okay.
He tried to prove that the Odyssey was written by a woman, whereas the Iliad was written by a man.
Interesting.
And the reason and this is in the 19th century, this is 1800s. The reason he had this argument was because there's so many women. They are sympathetically seen. Yeah. There's internal, we get their feelings. Yeah. I mean, the whole book begins with a woman goddess, which is the opposite of the Iliad. The Iliad begins with Zeus up in heaven trying to decide judgment on the Trojan War. The Odyssey begins with Athena saying, you know what, I should go help the home life of one of my favorite people. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a very different, just mode of being between the two books. So this one really is, I don't even know if the Odyssey is the right word for it. It's a nostos is what the Greeks would call it. It's a homecoming. So Penelope and how she protected the home and made the home and loved the home becomes kind of a central feature of the novel. What is Odysseus coming home to? Becomes a big question in the book, because he's traveling. He doesn't know what's going on at home. I mean, they didn't have cell phones. They're not FaceTiming. He has no idea if his wife is remarried. Yeah. He doesn't know if his son is still alive. He doesn't know if his kingdom is in shambles. And it's been under her protection for 20 years.
That's really interesting. I mean, another like tip to potential readers, those action scenes that you may have heard of, again, the Cyclops, the Lotus Eaters, the sirens, like I said, they don't occupy nearly as much space in the book as certainly I thought they did. I thought that was the book, and maybe there was like surrounded by little smatterings of domestic drama for when he comes back, because I remember that, and but even that is supposed to be the manly, shooting the arrow through the axe heads and then slaughtering the suitors and so forth. Yeah. But all the action, especially the core, most famous action scenes, I counted, they occupy, at least by book count, about 1/6 or 1/5 of the entire Odyssey.
That's right. So it's 24 books, and only 9 through 13 are the stories of Charybdis and the sirens and all of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So why do you think it seems like that this was a pretty distinctive, maybe even unique in the Greek ancient literature to do this? Like, what does that tell us about Homer, about what this book was meant for?
Yeah. So it's interesting because the way that the books 9 through 13, so we also have to kind of remember, like, none of this was written down for a really long time. I think people have in their imaginations, this is a book and you're reading a book. But it's more like, when you're at home with your uncles and they start telling a fishing story and then the fish gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. That is more like what the Odyssey is. Okay. The Odyssey is like, once upon a time, someone told the books 9 through 13.
Yeah.
And then the next time someone told the story of Odysseus, they stretched out a little bit. Where is he when he's telling this story? And how does he get back home from there? And then they stretched out a little bit more and was like, what does he find when he gets home? What happened before he got home? And it's kind of like what we do in cinema now. You have a story and then you tell the prequel, and then you tell the sequel, and you tell, and then you tell from another perspective, like Wicked, from the other side of the Wicked Witch and not just Dorothy. And that's kind of what happened. It was over hundreds of years that people started adding and compiling to this narrative before it was actually written down. So the heart of it, this little adventure story, is very fascinating because the way that it's phrased, Odysseus stands up in front of a congregation of people in a kingdom that's not his and says, I am the Lord of lies and the teller of tales. And then he starts lying for like 5 books about things that could not have happened.
We got to talk more about this, because this was also my big discovery when reading this book was I thought all of those core, most famous action scenes are told by Homer himself in the third person omniscient narrator. So, for all listeners, the third person omniscient narrator, if you don't know, is the classic way that stories are told when you are expected as the reader to say, this is really happening, or this really happened, because it's what you're reading by the narrator, right? So I thought all those action stories were told in the third person omniscient narrator, but no, you brought this up, like, it's Odysseus telling it in his own, as a character in the story, in a highly pressurized situation where he wants to present a very particular picture of himself. So you brought up the metaphor, a fishing story. Like, when I first read through it, I was like, oh, that's just, okay. So this is told through Odysseus. Okay. But then in the next chapter, after he's done, Athena appears to Odysseus, and now then Homer says, the third person narrator says, but he, Odysseus, did not speak the truth. He checked that impulse, and jockeying for an advantage made up this story. And then there's a made up story after a long, many books where he has been telling a story that you're wondering now, did he make that up? And then Athena, after he does that, says, Odysseus, you cunning, elusive, habitual liar. Even in your own land, you weren't about to stop telling stories and give up your sly deceits that are so much a part of you. So like at that point, you're like, wait a minute, did any of that happen? So how are we supposed to answer that question?
Yeah, this is actually, I think, one of the questions of the book. And this is why you would read it versus watching the movie. I think the movie's going to depict it like it all happened.
Right.
But the reality is when you're reading this story, the only monsters, now gods and goddesses occur. So Very much so. Like when we meet Odysseus, he's with Calypso. He's with like a daughter of a Titan. Like that part of the supernatural world is part of the action. The gods and goddesses do appear in the story, but the monsters only appear in Odysseus's telling.
Oh, okay. I didn't make that connection. Yeah. All right.
So when he's speaking and telling his story, we never actually see a monster except through his telling, and no one can validate his story because all of his men died.
Right. Yes. There's no other witnesses to contradict him. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of the action that we get to see that's corroborated by other witnesses, like Princess Nausicaa and Queen Arete, and like we get to see some of these other actors, and they validate those moments for us. Like we get to see him interact with them. But his own story has no corroboration whatsoever.
Is it too much of a 21st century projection back onto Homer that maybe he was telling a complex psychological drama, or are we just are we inventing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more like, well, this is how I usually talk about it in my class. Why is he telling the story that he's telling in this way? What is he trying to do? Well, think about it. He is in a foreign land, and he's telling them whenever there were not God-fearing inhabitants of that land, they were monsters. They were horrible. They didn't feed me. They didn't take care of me. Yeah. They didn't send me home. They delayed my journey. And he's showing that's monstrous behavior to the people that he wants to get stuff from.
Right.
So he's leaving them implicitly or imaginatively no option. You're either a monster or you're godlike in how you treat me right now. It's a really clever way to tell a story. This is the guy who created the Trojan horse. Yeah. This is the guy who knows how to do what he wants and manipulate his audience. And so I think in the way that he's telling the story is really powerful. He's getting everyone's emotions involved, where not only are they going to appreciate that they just heard a really fun, good story from one of the heroes of the Trojan War, but also they're like, we're not monsters. We're the good guys. Right. And they're going to leave that story being like, I'm going to be one of the good guys.
Well, the question about whether or not what Odysseus is saying is really happened or not brings up this literary question or literary device, I guess, called the unreliable narrator. And that was what I thought. I was like, is he an unreliable narrator? And that's actually a really interesting literary device. A little bit before I read the Odyssey, I had read a book that you would think would be completely in a different genre, completely unconnected. Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day. Ishiguro is a Nobel Prize laureate. And the book is about a 20th century British butler named Stevens, like you would think nothing to do with the Odyssey. But that book is a book about an unreliable narrator, and it's told brilliantly, such that you don't realize he's an unreliable narrator until it dawns on you very gradually. And as the reader, you're like, wait a minute. And it has this powerful effect. I've been thinking, what is that effect? And at least for me, the best way I could put it together, and I want to hear what you say to this, but it's almost like by being drawn into an unreliable narrator and slowly discovering how unreliable this character's narration is, it starts to unsettle you about your own narration, about your own life to other people and to yourself. You realize how easy it is to just twist a detail here, omit a detail there, and you look so much better in that light, or somebody else looks so much worse in that light just by the changing of a tone. Or it's an incredibly tempting move for human beings to make, is to be unreliable narrators. And that's an unsettling, but probably really important truth to be confronted with.
Well, so you just said that, and I thought, man, Curtis is so much more humble than I am. Because I read it and think Odysseus is a king, and I need to watch out for leaders lying to me.
Well, that's true.
Read it and thought, I'm capable of lies. And I was like, everyone around me is capable of lies. But I think either way, I think the narrative is actually trying to train you to listen closely, to think about who's the audience for the story, for the person who's talking, and how have people been trusted or not trusted, or should be trusted or not? And how do you know? How do you listen through the rhetoric? Because the reality is that all of us, either intentionally or unintentionally, are telling stories constantly about what has happened and who we are and whether we're good people.
Yeah.
And I think this narrative, this was a way of training the people, right? This was their form of like educational entertainment.
Right.
That taught people how to listen through. And if you think about the way that the story starts, that's one of the reasons, by the time that this starts getting passed down in writing, it begins with Telemachus. I think that's very intentional to say, okay, young people, who do you trust and why? And how do you step up? And how do you become a man? And how do you listen to those voices in your ear that are telling you one thing or not? And I think it's actually trying to talk to a certain kind of reader. To me, it's a key book to read between ages of 15 and 20.
I think, Jessica, you have just explained why it is that the Greeks invented democracy and we are destroying it. So this is very telling. So I want to keep talking about this idea of the unreliable narrator from the perspective of a book versus a movie. Because in a book like the Odyssey or The Remains of the Day, you can actually very artfully pull off the unreliable narrator because you can depict scenes from different directions, from different characters and so forth. Whereas the camera is the omniscient third-person narrator. And so we have just been conditioned, like what the camera shows is true, is really happening. Yes. And so it's very hard to depict cinematically this idea of the unreliable narrator. But my hope is the Odyssey can capture some of it. And here's why I have some hope. When I was thinking about, movies can't really pull off the unreliable narrator move, I thought, wait a minute, there was a movie I saw that did this. It's called Memento. And it's this. Oh, yeah. Have you seen it?
I was thinking the same thing right now when you were talking. Mm-hmm.
It's a movie called Memento. Guy Pearce stars in it, and it's a guy who can only remember the last 5 minutes of it. He can only he can only recap what happened the last 5 minutes, and then he forgets it. Right. So I thought, that's really interesting. Jessica, I did some research. Do you know who wrote and directed Memento?
Guy Ritchie? No. Who was it?
Christopher Nolan.
No, really?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm hoping and guessing something about this dynamic is in his mind when he was reading the Odyssey, and maybe he's gonna pull something very deep and clever out of how he films it. We'll see. But Memento. The other movie that pulls this off is Fight Club, starring Brad Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen?
I have, yeah. And I read the book years ago.
The David Fincher book, yeah. So, we could talk more about Fight Club, except that's the first rule of Fight Club.
Well, and also M. Night Shyamalan does this.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So it is possible. You talked about the role of Greek gods and that actually is portrayed as quote unquote real. Like that's not an invented, made up thing. According to Homer, this is actually happening. And I was thinking about that in reading this book about how the plot is just interwoven through what is happening both in the heavenly realm and then also how the gods are, intervening in human affairs. And, this is another example of where watching movies gets in the way of getting the most out of books, because when I was reading those scenes, I could not help but my mind go back to this movie that I watched, multiple times growing up. It's called Clash of the Titans. This is the 1980s version, not the remake in 2010 starring Sam Worthington and Liam Neeson playing Zeus of all people. But anyways, no, this is the 1980s version that was on rerun after rerun on cable. And so it was like, okay, I guess I'm going to watch Clash of the Titans again. And it was 80s movie cheesiness, right? So the god scenes were played with, swirling smoke effects machines, clouds and harps and all this, right? Believe it or not, Laurence Olivier played Zeus, and even he could not save the movie from descending into 80s camp and cheesiness. And so every time I'm reading in the Odyssey about sort of, the shenanigans of and the debates of these gods, I'm thinking Clash of the Titans, and I can't take it seriously. So anyways, I say that all to say is there's another barrier to especially Christians reading a book like the Odyssey, or frankly, any of these great classics, and taking these scenes of the gods seriously, because we've, at least, in certain traditions, been trained like, no, that's pagan stuff. Right. We believe in the one true God. And so, and this is, this happens not just in books, but like, I've had friends who are like wary of taking yoga because in like classical yoga, it has classic Hindu god references or gods references and so forth. So to take us through how Christians ought to engage with, works of literature like the Odyssey, in which they're taking us to a really different religious worldview, one which you would think on surface is at odds with the Christian worldview. Like, how do we engage with this kind of literature?
It's a great question. From my perspective, it's actually very beneficial for us to read this because God planned all of history. So he planned it in such a way that the Greek and Roman gods that these people turned to while he was revealing himself to the Hebrews, when Jesus was incarnate, God was building upon the history of the Greeks and Romans, right? It was, to me, it was very intentional for how his kingdom was going to continue to spread the truth.
Yeah.
And so this combination of the revelation that we receive and then the revelations of these unknown gods that they didn't understand, like it shows you that God was at work through these characters. But again, it's their myths. It's not, you're not supposed to take it with a reverence the way you would scripture. You actually get to see such a clear difference between myth and the realities of scripture that I think is very beneficial. If you read, for example, the Odyssey next to the David story, like 1st and 2nd Samuel. So I do this in my classes. What do they think a king is? And what does God think a king is?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Because, right, the works of human beings in the Odyssey, there's only so much they can imagine for kingship. There's only so much they can imagine for Godhead.
Right.
But the revelation is countercultural. It's subversive of culture. It points us beyond the abilities of that culture, of that time and place, to see something universal. And yet God, you can tell that it's revelation because it's not stuck in the Jewish culture. Yeah. It reaches beyond it and prepares the way for the incarnation and for Christian culture. So I think actually these things are really helpful to read in contrast with.
Yeah.
I would say that doesn't mean we denounce everything that's there. So for example, Zeus is the king of the gods. I think he's a pale reflection of our God who is king.
Yeah. And
then you see Athena, she's the goddess wisdom, also in our God, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you see is that they couldn't have one God, but they have lots of pale reflections that all find like a fulfillment in God. And so you can take these like small caricatures that help you understand a little bit about wisdom and a little bit about, omnipotence and things like that. It's so amazing that our God has all of that in him. And he isn't made up of a combination of all these other gods. He's the one God, which is the way he referred to himself, even to the Jews, is like, I'm the one God. I'm not all these little gods. I'm so far above them and I contain all of them and I'm bigger than all of them. So I think that that's also helpful.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, the pagan worldview at best can like present little mini caricatures of the one true God, such that each one is like, an attribute blown up, right. Rage, wisdom, peace, love. And in reality, we know not only God, but our human reflection of God and the human reflection of God in Jesus is far more complex, rich, and integration of all of these attributes. That's really great. It also struck me the other value for Christians of reading something like the Odyssey is to recognize that we have a historic faith, that we believe in history, and we believe in a very specific historical moment where Jesus was God entering human history at a very specific moment in history, which was in the midst of a Greco-Roman culture, a Greco-Roman world. And so if you want to understand that world that Jesus engaged in, and then Paul and so forth further more deeply engaged in, you really, it serves you well to understand the foundations of that culture, of that historical worldview. And so to understand why it was so radically subversive for Jesus to portray, not just to portray, depict, but to be a God that laid down power and submitted to power. It's really helpful to read something like the Odyssey and realize, oh my gosh, this is completely at odds with the picture of the divine as depicted by the Greeks, right? So
yeah, absolutely. So I mean, Athena is a good example. Like Athena looks incarnate, but she just like changes her faces all the time, and she's just a spiritual being. She's not something that actually walks among us and is born. And I mean, none of the gods would denigrate themselves to be born out of a human. Like that would be atrocious to the Greek imagination. So you also see there's just so much power in our narrative. Like we could not have come up with it. Like just the reality of like this defies human imagination, the narrative that we have in the gospel. And then it's real. It's just amazing. There's one person I'd recommend. Nadia Williams wrote a book, Christians Reading the Classics, that kind of explains some of the benefits of reading some of these classics to Christians that might be beneficial for people.
I'd never thought about that, but not only do you understand the world that Jesus entered in, it also like encourages you to think, this is not something that would have been made up or emerged organically from this culture, because it just runs so counter to their very instincts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jessica, give some further reading suggestions. Like for people, it's like, if you liked, right? So if you liked, the Odyssey, where might you go next? Both within classic Greek literature, but also imaginatively outside of that world.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So yeah, I have some ideas.
Okay.
I would say that the thing is about the Odyssey is I would never just read it one time.
Okay.
It's one of those books that the minute you read it, you really should either try to like listen to on Audible afterwards, read it again if you get a chance to, read a different translation or version, because it really does have a lot to offer to read several times. Like it's just almost impossible to get the first time through. So that would be my side note. The Iliad, also by Homer, just the story of the war that came before. A lot of those myths and those gods that you get to see, there's some of them that you don't even understand until you read the Iliad and you're like, oh, this is where it all comes from. I think this is, that's beneficial. And then if you're going to go outside of it, there's a fun contemporary book called The Son of Nobody by Jan Martel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I haven't read that one, but I have read other books by Jan Martel. Yeah.
Yeah. He did The Life of Pi, he's a great novelist. He's not Christian. So he talks a lot about Jesus in this book because he has a high reverence for Jesus. He grew up Catholic and he loves the story of the Gospels. He just doesn't believe he's Lord. And so Jesus comes up without any embarrassment and with exaltation throughout The Son of Nobody, right, in this story. So he tries to retell a Greek epic. And if you don't know this, in the Odyssey, Odysseus calls himself nobody.
Right.
So there's some connections here to the son of nobody and what this book is.
A key ploy of his with Cyclops, right?
That's right.
Okay. Wow. Shoot, I gave that away. But okay, keep going.
Well, and this is the other thing. I'll do some more recommendations, but there is still a lot to learn from the story. There are virtues and vices, and so that is a key example. Odysseus could have gotten away without anyone dying if he just didn't exhibit pride.
Right.
And none of the bad things that happened to him would have happened had he not been so proud of his own strategy that he yelled out, I'm Odysseus, and then everything unwinds from there.
That's right.
So the pride of making a name for yourself is very evident in the Odyssey in a way that in the Iliad, that's your goal. Your goal is to make a name for yourself. In the Odyssey, it's not to make a name for yourself. It's actually to go home and be with your loved ones. It's so different.
Well, how do you think that, you have both of these pictures at odds? Like one, the good life is to make a famous name for yourself. And then the other showing the deep, tragic flaws of that. How does that emerge from the same corpus?
I know. And it's weird that they give it the same name, that it's both as though it's from Homer. Again, like there's just no telling. We don't have a historical Homer. We don't have any evidence of this person. We have evidence of people like Socrates, but Homer's so far back that we just really don't know. But it is fascinating because it doesn't look anything the same. Yeah. In the Odyssey, when he goes into the underworld, right, he gets to see the dead. And it's that conviction that like life is short that requires him to act differently. Versus in the Iliad, you want to die a hero. Like death is something you like go for. Yeah. And in the Odyssey, it's something that like, no, death is not a good in the Odyssey, right? It's a very different narrative. But that's why I say read both of them. I think that would be really beneficial to people to get to read both of them. There's also, if you want to know some of the Greek stories, Edith Hamilton has a mythology book that I loved when I was a kid. Some people have done new versions of this. So Neil Gaiman wrote a Norse mythology that's kind of fun. Natalie Haynes wrote a book called Pandora's Jar that kind of tells you about all the women goddesses and women myths. So there's just this is like, it's kind of hot right now to like read a lot of these classics and reapproach them in different ways. But these stories really did form the imagination of our culture. And a lot of them, like you said, you've heard Scylla and Charybdis, you've heard these things, and now you get to see where they really come from. Yeah, it's great. All right, last question, Jessica. I know you've taught this book for years, and I also consider you a incredibly gifted and master teacher. And I also know that we have a lot of educators that are at varying levels that are part of our audience. So I want to ask you a question that hopefully you can help all of our educators listening out there, which is, how do you teach literature in the age of AI? So how has the advent of AI, for instance, changed, or maybe it hasn't, but how has it affected how you teach the Odyssey? I do think that the age of AI is changing teachers. And from my perspective, it has made me double down on the things that make me irreplaceable in the classroom. Okay, that's good. So I think a lot of teachers hopefully are wrestling for the first time with ways of teaching that are substitutable. Like you are not needed to do that. And other people can do that, and machines can do that. Yeah. And if you've been teaching in such a way that you're replaceable, it's a reckoning, I think. So give an example. What would be a standard way of teaching that is now replaceable, and therefore we should be moving to something more that is humanly distinct? Yeah. Asking students to summarize the text to you. Okay. ChatGPT can do that fine. Yeah. So asking students to summarize text, trying to get them to answer multiple choice, turn in essays that could have been written by AI, all of that is so replaceable in this new age. The reality is, what was the purpose of essays? The word essay means to try. The purpose of essays when they first began was an attempt at thinking. And so we have to go back and talk to students about what we're doing right now is not turning in a product. We have mistrained you into thinking that we needed your essay on Homer. I actually don't need an essay on Homer. It's just not, nobody needs an essay on Homer. Like the goal is not that product. It's just not. Yeah. The goal is for you to try to wrestle aloud with Homer and get a hold of your thoughts, because the more you try to write them down, you will be able to hold on to things better than if you're just processing orally. And so asking students to think of writing as the essay, as the try, as the attempt is a new way of thinking about it versus focusing on the product. So these are some of the ways that I think teachers are finding to change. Asking students to reflect on the text, be more personal in their connections to the text. Right. I think all of those things are really important. This is not reader response theory. I don't want you to be like, oh, I don't like Homer. I didn't enjoy it. Nobody cares. Yeah. Yeah, right. But if you want to reflect on, is Athena a good mentor? What do you think and why? Would you want a mentor like Athena? Is she somebody that truly is wise when you think of wisdom? That's a self-reflection that also calls you to wrestle with something higher than just your own personal preference on the text. And so asking those kinds of questions in the classroom becomes paramount, because students need to be formed as human beings, and AI cannot form you as a human. And so I think more of the classes need to put that at the center of the teaching experience, right? The human, relational, moral, virtue, permanent things.
Amen. And this is, again, just as a reminder, this is why we have Jessica come back regularly. It is to promote reading. It is because reading is going to be actually more important, not less important in the of AI, because it is the means by which we have to try. We have to essay, like you said. I love that interpretation of that work. It is the wrestling with the text that actually produces the human muscle, like at the deep level, our spiritual soul muscles. And there is just no replacement for it. You have to do it. And if you let AI do it for you, you will not become fully human. And so this is why, even as we are a podcast, a digital podcast, we're going to leverage this platform to get people to read, Jessica. So
I appreciate you doing that.
All right. Well, I look forward to your next return when you give me my next assignment on the Good Faith syllabus. So until then, Jessica, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, listeners, thank you for joining us, and look forward to next week when we once again gather around the campfire.